Welcome to Within the Frame, where we bring the most pressing issues across the globe into focus. I'm Kim Mok-yeon. The Vietnamese head of state is in South Korea this week on a visit carrying significant diplomatic and economic weight. Meeting President Lee Jae Myung on August 11th, two leaders agreed to deepen their comprehensive strategic partnership, expanding cooperation in defense, economy, science, culture, and infrastructure as well. Businesses from both countries also gathered in Seoul to explore new opportunities as the two sides set a goal to nearly double trade volume to $150 billion by 2030. Agreements were reached on critical mineral supply chains, high-speed railways, nuclear power, and defense industry collaboration. And with more than 10,000 Korean companies already active in Vietnam, the outcomes of this visit could shape the next phase of economic growth and regional strategy, even more developments to watch for in the months ahead. Now, for a deeper discussion on this, we connect to Junwoo Lee, Representative Director at the Union Yang Law Vietnam LLC. A big welcome.
Thank you for inviting me to have the discussion today.
Thank you for joining us. And also joining us is Lee Jae-hyun, Senior Fellow at the Asan Institute for Policy Studies. Good to see you, Dr. Lee.
Thank you so much for having me today.
Right, so let's begin our discussion right away with Dr. Lee. So like I've said, on the 11th, South Korea and Vietnam adopted a joint statement on deepening comprehensive strategic partnership, covering strengthened cooperation in various sectors, of course. First, let me ask, how would you assess the overall outcome of this summit?
Well, the summit itself and the joint statement, everything has went very smoothly this time. And it looks like the new Lee Jae Myung administration had a good start when it comes to the government foreign policy and diplomacy. And Lee Jae Myung administration really needed to show its commitment to Vietnam and Southeast Asia as soon as possible. And given the strategic and economic, also socio-cultural importance of Vietnam and the ASEAN countries to South Korea. And as you know, the Vietnam and Korea have had really cordial relations for the past few decades, and trade and investment has been kind of booming, and cultural people-to-people exchanges are thriving. And particularly in recent years, the bilateral partnership has been deepening in security and defense area as well. So this summit and joint statement covered all these major development between the two countries. So overall, it was a really great start for bilateral relations under our new Korean leadership. And also it was a good sign for Korea's diplomatic approach to ASEAN as a whole.
Right, so it was definitely a broad agreement, and it really does sound like a meaningful step for both countries moving forward. Now let's also bring in Director Lee into the conversation. So we hear you're currently based in Vietnam. What is the local sentiment regarding this summit, and also how do people in Vietnam actually view the results that have been achieved?
Well, the news media in Vietnam conveyed the details of the summit meeting and the joint statement, and emphasized that the party secretary Do Lam was the first ever state guest invited to Korea after the current President Lee Jae Myung took office in June. The media also focuses on the warm hospitality that was given to the party secretary and his delegates. I saw in Vietnam media that during this visit, the inauguration ceremony of the torso statue of Ho Chi Minh took place at the Vietnamese embassy in Seoul. And Yonsei University also conferred the party secretary an honorary doctorate degree in politics. So I can say that in general, the sentiment in Vietnam is quite positive, and the party secretary's visit this time is well regarded in Vietnam as a successful diplomatic event that shows an upgrade in Vietnam's national status and prestige.
Wow, so it sounds like the local mood has also been largely positive as well. Now, Director, let's look a little bit specifically at the trade developments. The two nations agreed to expand bilateral trade from the current level of about $86.7 billion to $150 billion in 5 years. How do you think this economic cooperation plans announced at the summit will translate into actual real opportunities for Korean companies?
Yes, the joint statement actually mentions virtually all industry sectors. And it's understandable because Korean companies are already in Vietnam in all industry sectors. The most notable implication is that now we are entering into a next level of cooperation. Now the focus is with the high value added, high technology industries, which is largely in line with Vietnam's recent industry policy drive. Specifically, the high-tech electronics, semiconductor, nuclear power, rare earth elements, high-speed railway, new urban development, and smart city project. These are mentioned, and it's expected to facilitate the Korean companies' possible investment in those sectors. The climate change adaptations and energy transition was also mentioned, and I expect it may lead to more favorable investment conditions for those renewable energy companies to make investment in Vietnam. The current bilateral trade level of 86.7 billion US dollars consists of 58 billion exports from Korea and 28 billion exports from Vietnam. And Korea and Vietnam is the third largest trade partner to each other. It's next only to China and the US. If the collaborations in the high value added sectors are widely made in the near future, the raising the trade volume up to 100 billion US dollars in 5 years, I believe it could be possible and will not be a mere proclamation of numbers.
So, borrowing your words, this whole next level of cooperation could really bring significant opportunities for Korean companies there. Now, let's also look into the bigger picture of global trade. So, amid the restructuring of trade systems, Dr. Lee, what is the diplomatic significance and importance of the decision to roughly double this trade volume in the next 5 years? Do you think this could be seen as part of a broader move to strengthen economic relations with the ASEAN?
Yeah, I guess so. The decision regarding the doubling Korean-Vietnam trade within next 5 years has got two different implications. First, on the ASEAN front, the Korea's economic partnership, especially the trade, has been kind of a backbone of the bilateral relation between ASEAN member states and South Korea. And the trade with Vietnam accounts for roughly half of Korea's trade with whole ASEAN countries combined. So the expanding trade relation with Vietnam has significant impacts on further promoting ASEAN-Korea trade, which is kind of mutually beneficial. And the second implication is for the regional or the global trade order. As you know, the Trump administration this year introduced a new tariff policy toward almost every country in the world, and it is a big risk for regional and global trade. And even someone calls it a US version of economic coercion. So it is also a major concern. This Trump administration's tariff policy is also a major concern for trade-dependent countries like Korea and ASEAN members, including Vietnam. So one of the ways to overcome this economic risk brought by the Trump administration is to promote intra-regional trade. So Vietnam-Korea bilateral trade is a part of it. So the doubling our trade volume between Korea and Vietnam is so important in this context. So the commitment to further deepen trade partnership between the two parties, between Korea and Vietnam, is meaningful in this perspective. But the effort shouldn't stop here. There's more to do. Regional countries need to work together and give a fresh boost to existing trade agreements like RCEP and CPTPP. By revitalizing these agreements, we can keep the free trade system in our region. And there's a lot of things that South Korea and Vietnam can cooperate on this matter.
Right. So, with the risks posed by the latest tariff imposition of the Trump administration, bilateral trade with Vietnam, between Vietnam and South Korea, would be definitely even more important at this point. Now, we are aware that there are more than 10,000 Korean companies in Vietnam currently operating there, and the two countries agreed to work closely to ensure stable business activities there. From a national policy perspective, Director Lee, what measures do you think are necessary to guarantee these companies' stable operations?
Yes, that's a very well-timed question. And I will mention that one big progress in this summit is that Korea committed to facilitate Vietnamese employees' employment in Korea based on Korea's employment permit system. And it's essential for economic collaboration to allow both countries' employees to reside stably in other countries. So same for the Korean employees in Vietnam. So currently, most of the Korean employees in Vietnam have to renew their work permits every 2 years, regardless of whether they just arrived or whether they have been there for more than 10 years without any problem. And in practice, this is not a simple process and it takes a lot of time and efforts in preparing application documents. Besides the work permit issues, there are regulatory requirements which might look arbitrarily lengthy and partially onerous to foreign investors. And it may be an obstacle to an investment and business activities in Vietnam. Even where the law allows certain activities without requiring regulatory approval, there are many instances where the local government's regulatory practices deviate from what is clearly stated in the law. So more than anything, transparency is the key. And the transparency in providing tax and other benefits in the sectors favored by the government would be the key to the success in high-tech transformation of Vietnam. So we understand that the Vietnamese government is also committed to regulatory reform to make it more transparent and clear. And we should also understand that it may take a bit of time to achieve it.
Mm-hmm. So, government level support would be essential to keep those businesses secure. Now, on the resources front, the summit between the two leaders also led to an agreement to expand supply chain cooperation on critical minerals like rare earths. So, in the era where resource protectionism has weaponized rare earths, what kind of diplomatic benefits could cooperation with Vietnam bring, Dr. Lee?
At least since the U.S.-China strategic competition, the economic security and supply chain issue has been one of the most important, one of the top priority of every country in the world. And the South Korea is not an exception. The Korean government put so much emphasis on economic security and supply chain issue, and it will become more and more important in the coming years. South Korea has its own risk of supply chain, especially in the context of U.S.-China strategic competition, and we don't have much minerals or rare earths in this country. And as everyone remembers, we experienced a few cases of a supply chain crisis before. So the Korean government has made effort to secure supply of critical minerals and rare earths, which is very vital for South Korea's economic stability and prosperity. So the agreement between Korea and Vietnam this time is a part of, I guess, this broader effort by the South Korean government, and especially as a part of the agreement between Korea and Vietnam. The two countries agreed to set up Vietnam-Korea Critical Mineral Supply Chain Center, which I welcome so much. And Vietnam is well known for its vast reserve of rare earths and some critical minerals. The critical mineral supply chain cooperation will further expedite South Korea's investment in Vietnam, and the increased Korea's investment will create more jobs and facilitate technology transfer to Vietnam. So it's kind of win-win strategy between Korea and Vietnam. And of course, with this closer cooperation between Korea and Vietnam, the partnership between the two countries will be even more strategic. So it's kind of upgrading our bilateral partnership between Korea and Vietnam.
Right, definitely. Let's also touch upon another side of the achievement, which is security and defense. They agreed to expand the stage for Korean defense exports, and the two nations actually agreed to restart the Korea-Vietnam Defense and Military Cooperation Committee, which had been suspended since 2008, and to strengthen defense cooperation, of course. So, Dr. Lee, in this complex geopolitical environment of the South China Sea, what is the strategic significance of this latest move?
Well, it's basically, security and strategic issue is kind of sensitive when it comes to Korea and ASEAN and Korea-Vietnam cooperation. And before I answer to your question, I should take note this. Well, the committee that you just mentioned was suspended and resumed with this summit, but with or without the defense and defense the committee, the defense and defense industry cooperation between Korea and Vietnam has been well developing in the past few years. Now, with the resumption of the committee, the cooperation will be even deeper in the coming years. And also the deeper defense industry cooperation was mentioned in the summit and in the joint statement. So this development bodes very well for strategic cooperation between Korea and Vietnam in the coming years. And when it comes to South China Sea or the East Sea, as Vietnam calls it, the joint statement and the press conference by the President and Secretary General, there was mention on this issue of South China Sea. And the two parties, Vietnam and South Korea, are basically agree on major points regarding the issue of South China Sea, such as respect for international law, freedom of navigation and overflight, and the opposition to militarization in the area. And I don't believe that the Korean government has intention to involve itself directly into the dispute in the South China Sea by the enhancing defense and defense industry cooperation with Vietnam. However, intended or not, the deeper defense cooperation, of course, will have some geopolitical implication in the South China Sea. And I should mention this last point. On the other hand, the defense industry export to Vietnam has another aspect. At the moment, Vietnam is trying to modernize its military and trying to replace its old weapon system, which was imported from the Soviet. And so the Korea-Vietnam defense industry cooperation will help Vietnam to achieve this military modernization goal. So it is kind of another win-win cooperation area between Korea and Vietnam.
Right, so it does look like a very important industry to look forward to between the two countries. Now, let's also touch upon infrastructure and development. South Korea and Vietnam also agreed to cooperate in areas like nuclear power, high-speed railways, and new city development, like we've been talking about a while ago. Now, this opened new opportunities for Korean companies in Vietnam, of course. Director Lee, what kind of major localization challenges do Korean companies actually face when investing or even entering the Vietnamese market?
Yeah, it's very important to understand the nature and the historical reason for the project itself, the needs of the sponsors and government, and the regulatory hurdles, especially in the infrastructure project. So for nuclear power, we need to first understand that it took quite a long time in Vietnam until the nuclear power became a part of Vietnam's power grid. And it was only last year. So the nuclear power development is expected to happen on a step-by-step basis, and it may take a bit of time to result in actual export of nuclear power technology or plant. So for the high-speed railway project, This is actually a huge project, which would alone take as much as 67 billion US dollars, and already a variety of proposals have been made to the government. Same for the new urban development plans. There were many plans already been proposed in several other districts and regions other than the Bangnin this time, with different concepts. These infrastructure projects involve a bunch of regulatory hurdles, including project approvals at different levels of government authorities, the land compensation issues and the environmental issues. Yet we need to meet the sponsors' needs of fancy high-tech model. So one of the way to navigate through these regulatory hurdles is to make a joint effort with a reputable business partner in Vietnam. Vietnam government recently plans to bring up domestic private sector companies to develop its economy, and it appears that more incentives and supports may be given to Vietnam's private companies that bring in foreign investment in high value added sectors. So that means that Korean companies may also consider teaming up with the Vietnamese local partners for the joint venture or joint partnership to make an investment in the future.
Well, that will be definitely some big good news for local companies trying to enter the Vietnamese market. Now, before we conclude our discussion, finally, Dr. Lee, looking ahead, this summit is seen as a starting signal for expanding and deepening Korea's diplomacy in Southeast Asia in general. So for the Lee Jae Myung administration's successful pragmatic diplomacy, how should South Korea's Southeast Asia policy move forward?
Well, there are tons of recommendations that I can make, but just briefly, 3 points. The most important thing is to announce an initiative specifically tailor-made toward Southeast Asia and ASEAN as soon as possible. As was the case that the New Southern policy under previous Moon Jae-in administration. So the government have to make a quick action to announce its policy. The second, the consistency and the continuity in policy is very crucial, and there should be strong political will from the leadership to push this Korea-ASEAN relations forward. And the third point is the message toward ASEAN countries is very important, but at the same time, we have to look into our own society. We have lots of Southeast Asian nationals here in Korea, and the Korean government has to keep a close eye on the human rights issues of those Southeast Asia nationals in South Korea. Thank you.
Right. So it seems all in all, it points towards a hope of deeper engagement in Southeast Asia ahead, and we will be definitely paying close attention to the latest developments. But thank you so much for your time and for your insights tonight, Director Lee. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for inviting me, and you're welcome. Yeah.
And of course, Dr. Lee as well. We really appreciate your time and your insights.
Thank you so much.
And that'll be all from us on Within the Frame. Be sure to tune in again next time as we continue to explore the stories that matter. Till then, stay informed and engaged.